Welcome to Designing the Future. This series is a space for dialogue, reflection, and imagination, where Indigenous voices lead the way in rethinking the systems that shape our lives. From education and healthcare to governance, economies, and beyond, we'll explore how Indigenous knowledge, lived experience, and cultural wisdom can guide us towards a more inclusive and equitable tomorrow. The conversations you'll hear are grounded in story and spirit. They are not just ideas, but lived realities that carry both resilience and responsibility. Some of what we share may be sensitive, as it touches on histories of harm, systemic inequities, and ongoing struggles faced by Indigenous peoples. We encourage you to listen with openness and care, and to remember that healing and transformation come through truth, respect, and relationship. This is not simply a podcast or a video series. It's an invitation to imagine new possibilities, to engage critically, and to act collectively. Together, let's design a future that honors Indigenous knowledge and creates space for equity, dignity, and respect for all. I'm your host, Laura Mueller, and this is Designing the Future. Thank you for joining me today. So we're back for my podcast, Designing the Future, and today's episode is about housing. And we have Leo Hebert here today, also known as Uncle Leo in the community. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, good morning. First of all, thanks for inviting me to come here today. I've always said I'd like to be able to talk a little bit provide more detail about who I am and where I am. And podcast is, they're so popular nowadays. So my name is Leo Hebert, or Hebert, if you're English, and I'm happy to be living on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lheidli T'enneh for 57 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I moved here from Alberta. I'm Cree. My mother's Cree. My dad is French. Mom's from Slave Lake, the Sawers Reserve in Slave Lake, Alberta. And my dad's from Cold Lake, Alberta, northern Alberta. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married. I have 5 children and 11 grandchildren, and I don't know how many other in-laws and outlaws all of this.
So a little bit about your background. Oh. So you've worked in housing for many, many years.
Yes.
And
a variety of different ways. I mean, it started, in fact, just this summer. I was up to Cold Lake, took a little 10-day trip on my vehicle, went camping, some familiar territories, and I saw one of the first houses that I helped build when I was 19 years old.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And I started working with a guy and his son, and we were building a house for one of my uncle's neighbors. And so I hadn't had any experience at the time, a little bit of, lots of enthusiasm. So they hired me, and I haven't stopped since. It seems like, I got involved in construction in Alberta and toured all over Alberta as a young man, learning how to build. And then I moved back to BC in 1980, and then met my wife, and we built a house. I was building houses then for a company here in Prince George, and saw an ad in the newspaper, and they were looking for somebody with Aboriginal ancestry who would be interested in learning how to be a building inspector. And this is through an organization called BC Native Housing at the time, and BC and Remote Native Housing. And it was under the cadre position with Canada Mortgage and Housing. So I started there. That's really how I got started in the whole administrative business, was learning to be a building inspector, what to look for in buildings, whether you're renovating or new construction. And so I went through that process, and oh my goodness, I was fortunate enough to work with so many different organizations and so many different, like First Nations, urban and rural, on and off reserve. Just a whole variety of different roles that I've played over the year. Yeah. I even spent time with the federal government for Canada, for Canada Mortgage and Housing for a period of time. Thought I could go in there and I'm going to make some changes here. We're going to change things.
Yeah.
and all of those things. Yeah, and so I've been really fortunate over the years to have worked with so many good organizations and communities who really had a goal let's do better for our community.
Yeah.
Really, really, really what it was all about. I've always worked with the Friendship Center and the Tribal Council and the local Tribal Council and some of the First Nations bands and a variety of things over the years. This common goal was housing is a really important part of who we are. And so that's what that little bit about me. I was fortunate. I had some training. I got some experience, hands-on experience, out in the communities, and the elders and the people from those communities always welcomed me, made me feel welcome. It was always such a wonderful community to be involved with.
So, what do you think we're doing right now when it comes to housing? I know there's a lot of conversation about what we could be doing better, and we can get to that. But what are we actually doing that's making a difference right now?
Well, I mean, there's a variety of things that are happening in and around. Probably sometimes we don't see them all, but there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes with looking at different ways to build homes, different methods of construction. With all of the changes in the climate and, the smoke and the extra heat in the summertime and the climate, as the climate is changing, there's a lot of really good work that's going on right now to prepare, right from designing your home to what types of materials you're going to use and where those materials are going to come from, and to reduce your own greenhouse gas or your own carbon footprint, looking at ways to find materials that are local, closer, so we don't have to transport as much. And then right from financing as well, too. I mean, when I first started into this, there was very little money in housing.
That's interesting.
When I mean money from government and from like a commitment to housing. There was minor little bits, like just yesterday, the new Prime Minister Carney just announced a $32 billion housing program.
Wow.
For Canada.
That's massive.
So, over the past number of years, I would say the last 10 years or so or more, the governments, provincial, federal, municipal, regional districts are coming together more too.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with a professor not too long ago, and he had mentioned that, basically everything leads back to housing when it comes to issues. And even on social media, I seen one time where people, you ask them if you won the lottery, what would they do? And the first thing is I'd pay off my house or I'd buy a house. So, housing is our security. It's that, innate need to feel like we have somewhere that's our own. When it comes to all these housing initiatives, I'm interested, how are we kind of implementing traditional Indigenous ways? Or even looking at how are we trying to make this culturally resonant so that it works for Indigenous people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The challenges that we've had, in my own experience, and what I've seen from working within remote or away from home communities, away from city communities, when their members come into the city, there's a whole variety of different challenges that they have. There's bylaws, there's sound, there's a whole variety of rules around housing in the city. And the difference between the design of homes, the size of homes, I remember in the early 80s we used to, and now still, it was called the National Occupancy Standard. So you would build a house based on the size of your family. And the Canadian nuclear family at the time was 4.2 people. So we were designing houses were using the same occupancy standard. And this is just one small example of the challenges that the differences, I should say,
Yeah.
that we have in developing housing. And a lot of times First Nations or Indigenous people, there's multi-generational people living together in the same, whether it's the same household, whether it's within very close proximity to each other.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. There's a really good example, the Newhawk First Nation. Richard Hall. I've been working with him over the past year or two with a group of people, and that community's developed and designed a home that takes into the lifestyles of our people in consideration. So it's not your typical colonial kitchen.
Yeah.
It's more of a food processing, fish processing, meat processing kind of a kitchen that can handle the excess moisture, for example. So when you're boiling, preparing, canning, doing all of those things.
Yeah.
A traditional kitchen, a colonial typical kitchen is not designed to manage that much moisture.
Yeah.
Right. So this particular kitchen is designed for that lifestyle in mind.
That's super interesting. You know, I've
Yes.
seen a bunch of, like, even this year, there's so much salmon everywhere. And I'm seeing everybody like smoking all this salmon.
Yeah.
And I don't have a smokehouse.
Right.
Where would I get a smokehouse? How do I get access to a smokehouse?
Good. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it's like, all I want is some dry fish. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, how do I do that? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think these are questions
especially in an urban center, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Because even with my nation, they were giving a little bit funny story, but they were giving fish to members.
Right.
And, but we had to gut it and we had to clean it and and I'm like, well, like I live in a suite, right? So I'm like, I'm not going to so I was like, okay, well, why would I take salmon if I'm not prepared to be able to? So there's this disconnect to traditional ways of being that, how do we mitigate for that? How do we start to, so a lot of housing, maybe it's not even in the housing, maybe it's a part of extended infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
And extended, like even if we could look at community smokehouses or, other types of things. And honestly, a lot of this hasn't even crossed my mind because these aren't, we're not having the conversations to be able to come up with these alternative solutions. So how do we start having more of those conversations where we can start, it's like, okay, well, if we need a smokehouse, then how do we come together to do that as a community?
As a community, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's some funny stories of what's happened in the past when some of my associates or people I know who tried to build a smokehouse in the city of Prince George and then start smoking, and pretty soon the neighbors are calling and the fire department shows up. What's going on? Whoa. So even a permit.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, so those are the challenges that we've always had.
Yeah.
We've had I'm not to say that the technology of building houses should be changed. Mm-hmm. Like that part is, but it's the way we design and build our homes.
Yeah.
To fit within the lifestyle. And there's a lot of room. In the old days, we would build a lot of houses with 8 stories or 8 steps up, 7 or 8 steps up, 7 steps down. So it's a split.
Yep.
And that's always been a big problem in community because as people age, stairways, and usually it was the same old standard house too on reserve that we were confined to building what's called modest housing. So modest housing is a maximum 1,000 square feet, no finished basements, no patio doors, no closet organizers, no anything extra special, just very, it's called modest.
Yep.
So that was it. That's all we could do within what was called a maximum unit price as well too. So it was called a MUP. So we had for this area, we had, small amounts of money to build these boxes is what I would say.
Yeah.
They literally were just rectangular boxes.
Yeah.
And, it did provide that shelter, but there was never enough. There's always been a huge demand for need.
Yeah.
New homes as well as upgrading existing ones as well.
Well, and integrative housing has been on my mind a lot. And what does that actually mean? And how do, of course, there's traditional components, but when you think of healthcare and I mean, a lot of our issues, how do we actually help vulnerable populations, especially with Indigenous people? You know, housing is such a huge component of that. And, you know, obviously there's no single answer. This is a huge problem. And I mean, where do we even start with that? Where do we even, it just seems so daunting that.
Sorry. I mean, it's really, it is a huge, I mean, back in 1986, I worked with there was 17 First Nations working together through the Carriacou County Tribal Council. And we, in 1986, we looked at and we developed what was called a housing demand study, for 17 First Nation communities. So looking ahead 20 to 25 years as well. Based on, planners have a special formula for how many people are born and you create that. So there's been a constant climb of population growth, but the provision of housing or the providing of housing, whether an individual wants to live at home in their own reserved community, or if they want to move and live in a more urban center. So the need and demand was identified in 1986.
Wow.
And it continued to climb, but there was never any hope a heck of Indian Affairs or whoever, Canada Mortgage and Housing, all those that were involved at the time. There was no way they were going to keep up to not even a percentage of what the need was. So there has to be a more concerted effort, I think, too, between not only federal, provincial, municipal governments, but also us as Indigenous community. To get together. And discuss and listen to those that are people who are on the street. Listen, we sometimes do too much talking.
Yes, absolutely.
We need to do a little more listening to the needs of the people. What do they want?
And I've had that conversation quite a bit lately. Because even when you look at addiction recovery, so there's only so many. So within BC, for example, there's 8 facilities, or there was when I was looking at it the one time. There's 8 facilities for Indigenous individuals. And in order to go into those facilities, you have to have your status. Otherwise, the cost of it, so a 3-month stay in recovery program is around $30,000. So most people in recovery are living in poverty. They're having issues. So, I mean, when you think of Indigenous culturally relevant second stage resources for people coming out of domestic violence, recovery, very high risk situations, who are not even ready to live in individual settings. One of the communities, I was talking with somebody one time, and they had built a bunch of tiny homes, and it was single males that ended up residing in most of them. And there was a lot of harm that ended up happening, self-harm that happened. So how do we look at, is it community dwellings? What kind of community type living could we potentially, and I mean, I get it, there's a lot of policy limitations, but how can we potentially get there? Or what is even there? There's so many questions.
Well, because of all of the results of, the residential schools, and we know all of the stories of how breaking the family down, taking the family apart, and people, so that whole genocidal, we can call it that, that's what it was.
Absolutely.
How it had changed so many, in so many barriers, put up so many barriers to do what you wanted to do. My own grandmother was taken at, she was 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
And my mother was there too as well. So, I mean, in order to do, and I know, for example, to provide that, I would say, holistic approach to providing housing, the Friendship Center, a variety of different organizations and agencies are realizing and understanding now that we can't just build homes.
Yeah.
That we also have to provide those wraparound support services to continue to provide that support, so people don't either try to fall off or whatever, start using drugs again or whatever else they're doing.
Yeah.
And of course, this is supply of treatment locations.
Yes.
Are limited.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you say, some have to pay, some don't.
No.
And it's just, there has to be a real concerted effort to, not only for a short term, not only just for 1 or 2 year kind of projections. We have to take into consideration from our own teachings that we work within 7 generations.
Yeah.
We are working within 7 generations. So we need to have a little bit longer kind of plan, not just a 1 or 2 year plan, right? And integrating, I know communities that are really successful who have integrated all of the relearning of their language, even their own type of food, their own batlats or potlat system as a form, and there's some traditional governance systems in place. There's a lot of children and family care now is being more and more focused on communities managing it.
Yeah.
Housing, we're working on that as well too. We're working on, to create our own standards to manage our own housing. So we don't rely on Indian Affairs or CMHC we can utilize their tools and what they have to offer.
Yeah.
But the plan and how we do things have to be done by ourselves.
So what does that look like?
Oh, there's lots of good things that are going on right now.
Yeah.
There is. There's some really good examples of what communities who have done that.
Yeah.
Who have said, that's, no, we're just going to do what works for us.
Yeah.
And so right now there's building codes and bylaws that are in the cities. In communities, yes, there's standards, but it doesn't have the same level of enforcement or the capacity to enforce and to manage that.
Yeah.
So we need to train more young people. I think as an old guy is kind of spinning off out into the future here somewhere. But the young people that are coming in now, what an opportunity for them.
Yes.
Because, the Canadian population, the world population, their ears are opened. They have been opened.
Yeah.
They do have an understanding of what's happened and what the history was and why we're at.
Yeah.
And the question you asked me, what is the solution? Well, I tell you what, not anybody has one solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all have a lot. There's a lot of good ideas, and but we need to get together.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether we're First Nation or Métis or non-status or whatever we are, whatever government wants to call us.
Yeah.
But no, we need just to get together as a community.
Yeah.
We started that here by building the urban native community here with the Aboriginal Housing Society in a certain way. Was to kind of pull people together a little closer to have some more wraparound services for them.
Yeah.
But again, this is all new.
Yeah. It's super important.
Yes, it's good to highlight that. There's a number of organizations that are there's the BC Housing Manager Association of BC, First Nation Housing Managers Association of BC. Yeah. So there's a group of people who are managing housing now, whether on reserve and off reserve. Yeah. They're continually building their skills and knowledge on how to either not just manage housing and not just build housing, but also to think about community. How do we involve the whole community? How do we involve our community members?
Yeah.
And what part can they roll? You know, there was a really good project where are you familiar with Habitat for Humanity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you know, Habitat for Humanity blended with some First Nations organizations out east.
Yep.
So they use the same principle. You have to work volunteer so many hours helping somebody else build a house.
Yep.
Once you reached a certain level of hours, then your name is on the list for a house to be built for you.
Yeah.
By others, right? And the cost of construction is really causing chaos right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the whole cost of construction and, you name it. But there is solutions locally. Our people have survived on this planet for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Before Indian Affairs and CMHC came along.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, no kidding, right?
Like we didn't need to say, so we know how to do things. We know how to build things. We know how to look after our people. We know how to feed ourselves. We have our own language. We got our own songs. There's so many strengths that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we need to build on that. And I know it is happening.
Yeah.
In the years that I've been involved since the 80s to where we are now.
Yeah.
There's lots of growth.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't see that either.
So it keeps coming up in my mind. Where does ceremony exist in housing? And does it I mean, a lot of what people have been asking for is this return to, our cultural ways and how does ceremony work into that?
Well, that a lot of times when a newer development is going to be built, I know that the spiritual people and leaders would go and they would do a smudge ceremony. So they would clear the air of that land.
Yep.
And pray. And so that only good things will happen on this space. So that's one. That's just kind of the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also how we, I know some housing societies provide elders support services if there's none there. They have cooking classes. They have multi-purpose rooms as well to learn your own language. So more communal spaces is a good thing. It's a different, but ceremony, it's even how we respect. Like everything that's in our home, for example, is made from earth. Yeah. And we have a respect as Indigenous people. We have a connection to our land, to the resources, and to a creator. We have that attachment. Yeah. Not everybody does. Yeah. But absolutely. We do. But we do. And the term gratitude and being grateful, and our people were and are. Yeah. I can't speak on behalf of everybody either. Obviously, I got to be careful with that. But I'm not I'm not speaking on behalf of all Indigenous people because everybody has different opinions, different views. They have their own cultures, their own ways. And I really can't. It's difficult to kind of parenthesize or just summarize everything into what Indigenous people to do. Yep. But in my own experience, just taking the moment to pray before you have something to eat. Mm-hmm. Maybe smudge your home every once a month. Yeah. But when you come from anger and you come from dysfunction and you come from all of that, we have to work on the person's soul at the same time. I used to say we're retrofitting houses and we need to retrofit some of our people at the same time. Yeah. It goes together. Yeah. Healing our homes. Yeah. Healing ourselves within our homes. You can heal a house. Retrofit it. Make it new. So what does that look like then? Well, there's a good example in Williams Lake where the First Nations there, where their treatment center, they would not only just take the individual, the person who was causing the situation in the home, but they would take the whole family to treatment. Yeah. So the whole family would go to treatment. And while they're away, the community, the band and what have you, would fix up their house. Oh, wow. So they could go into treatment, they go to healing, and when they come home as a whole, they don't come back to that same nagging issues that are happening within the home. they've got a whole new perspective when they come out of treatment.
Yeah.
And then they've got a whole new environment when they come home.
Yeah.
So it helps it's like a working together between the health department and healing and social services and housing, working together.
Well, because our communities have gotten bigger. You know, when you used to go out and you'd come home and your community was all living within the same, you know, kind of not 100 square feet, but so many square feet, right? Yeah. So everybody was kind of on top of each other. And now, you know, I think that distance has almost created, like it's kind of put a spotlight on the issues, because how do you come together in communal ways? Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, because what you're saying is like your physical environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of has an impact on that for sure. I mean, they were small, tiny homes already. Yeah. You know, when I first got in this business back in the early 80s, the First Nation, one community I'd gone to, I won't say which one, but I'd gone out to, and they were literally living in tar paper shacks. Yeah. Right? And this is 1980. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and they're living in tar paper shacks, and they had no running water. You know what I mean? Like, it was like we're going back into some other country somewhere. Yeah. In Canada. Yeah. And, you know, so we've had to go a long way, and I really believe personally, though, that there's some very good people that have been involved in this and are continuing to work on it. And there's a lot of young people who are really well educated, know their language, know their communities, and are really making things happen at a higher level as well too. You know, there's Indigenous ICE, they're called, not the American ICE that are knocking down doors, but the Indigenous ICE. They coordinate all kinds of energy efficiency, climate action, global warming, fighting initiatives for water, just the basics. Yeah. Water, food. Yeah. You know, just our basics that we need. Yeah. And so they're finding really good alternative ways to ensure that communities and individuals have access to that.
Yeah. Where do elders fit into all of this?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. We need to listen more. You know, I mean, the elders can help us with how a house is technically built. Yeah. They may, some do, of course, obviously. Yeah. They built their own homes. But we need to listen more. You know, we need to listen more. They need the elders we're losing elders too a lot of the original elders. Yeah. You know, and I know a lot of communities. I've seen a variety of home communities where they built seniors' homes. Yeah. Like they're all with the common kitchen and common eating area, and you know, and as long as it's within their own territory or their own community, they seem to be okay. But if you think you're going to move somebody away from the community, to another city or whatever, no. Yeah. No. So there's so listening to them, and of course, and understanding that the experience that they had in providing shelter for their community and their families, and the challenges they had. You know, growing not just prior to contact. Yeah. You know, but today, of course, we're in a totally different world and a much more modern world and higher speed and all of these things that we see. But I really, you know, the wisdom that the elders carry with them, with their language and their stories and how to survive on the planet in your environment. We really need to make sure we keep track of all of that for sure. And the elders are put on boards. They have an elder representative on boards for organizations. And there's elders organizations that are becoming more and more, I would say, listened to. Yeah. It is starting to happen.
Yeah. So like a reclamation.
It is.
Yeah. That knowledge. And that is one of my worries too, because it's so, I feel like we're just not capturing it enough. No. And there's so much, and I'm just worried that, you know, when I see so many elders passing, and it's like, how are we going to we need to do something about that now.
You're right, and I
Yeah.
and I totally believe it. And the elders that I worked with over the years, that I've had the honor to work with over the years, in no uncertain terms, if you didn't really do what they wanted,
Yep.
you would know.
Yeah.
You would know.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I had my bum chewed a few times
Yeah.
because I wasn't listening.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of my learning is that I needed to listen more, and governments and others need to listen more, because there was a time when you'd come into a community as a housing person, band manager, chief, maybe some other individual from the community.
Yep.
We would decide what kind of houses and where they're going to go.
Yeah. Yes.
And then community members, after they were all built, here's your keys to your house, now look after it.
Yeah.
There was no involvement at the beginning with those people that were getting the homes. What kind of house do you want?
Yeah.
Where do you want your living room window to face?
Yeah.
Like, get involved in that. There was policies. You only got this much 1,000 square feet. You got this much time. Get your money to get your build. And we were usually building in the flipping fall because the paperwork took a year. From the time you start applying to get your housing together, by the time all the paperwork comes through from Indian Affairs and CMHC and every God knows who, it was always October. We were just getting started. Winter construction in the north, you might as well add another 20% on the cost.
Yeah.
And so there was that we had to deal with. So all of that. So now that we're through the First Nations Housing and Infrastructure Council, there's a move to take that over. Take over the delivery of housing funding with and for, just like the First Nations Health Authority did. Mm-hmm. Very similar to that. Some are trying to do something similar to that with housing as well, too. And there's lots of opportunities coming up for that.
So how do you think we can involve and have better engagement with elders and have that consultation? And I mean, this goes across every, not just housing. This goes in education and in business and everything. Mm-hmm. How can we have better involvement?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some good examples where community or organizations are utilizing the wisdom and the knowledge and the skills of the elders from their not only purely from a culture perspective too. There's some very knowledgeable elders who are good business people and are informed, and so there's a variety of examples that I can see where they're looking at traditional leadership processes. How the Indian Act brought in the chief and council kind of stuff, but it just ignored their traditional methods of governance.
Yeah.
But now those that are returning that more of a traditional way of governing and communicating, like I've always heard out in many First Nations and Indigenous communities, that nothing is done in secret. We always do things in public.
Yeah.
So we have to have some good open discussions. And a lot of the communities are doing that more and more now. Yep. There's more accountability, visibility. There's more one-on-one, face-to-face kind of engagements.
Yeah.
Small focus groups.
Yeah.
There's elder societies that are forming.
Yes.
Have formed.
Yeah.
And have been around for a long time, actually.
Yeah.
It's just like, what role do they play? What role do they play in community development and you name it? So we've got a lot of, I think we have to look at what world we want to live in ourselves.
Yeah.
We've been forced to colonize. Yeah. So as we decolonize, what does that world look like for us?
Yeah.
As Indigenous people.
Yeah, because I don't think we're actually asking that.
And no. And then who decides what that looks like?
Yeah.
It should be us.
So, nature. Well,
I'm going to be 70 here pretty soon, and I was fortunate. I had the chance to work with so many different people, and I was given opportunities to do things. And what we do when we're here, we do our what we can while we're here, briefly. And I like to think I made a difference a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
And I'm working with teams, and it never was just me by myself. It was always working with others. And I think that the young people, I've got a lot of good optimism to the young people of today with their education and their enthusiasm and their will, and they're making change.
Yeah.
They're doing it.
They are. Yeah.
And that's kind of what we were trying to do too when we were younger.
Yeah.
And they'll take us to the next level.
Yeah.
It's a slow process.
It is. It is.
It took 180 years to bring us to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to have that grace and to remember that it's going to take time.
We just got to know who we are, where we've come from, who our people are, a sense of belonging, a sense of connecting. That's who I am.
Yeah.
And once the people that look towards their own cultural solutions, all I know is that once they're committed to that, you find out a little bit more about how valued and how important our languages and our songs and our traditions and the way we prepared our food and how we hunted and how we survived on this planet long before Sir John A. Macdonald.
Yeah.
And we have that.
Yeah.
I heard on CBC Radio the other day, and I'll be quiet after this, but there's some Inuit and some First Nations are restoring their traditional food system. So get away from processed foods, sugars, pops.
So important.
All of those things, and get back to to our good traditional foods.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's helping a lot with their health and their outlook and who they are and all of that. So there's some good things going on.
Yeah, it feels like just this.
And it's slow.
Okay, that's
good. And it's slow.
That's good to remember.
I've been, like I said, since 1980 to now.
Yeah.
I've been involved, part of, and observing and what have you. And the growth from just my little period of time to where we are now, just went to an incredible amount of growth.
Yeah.
But there has been we still have a lot of kids in care. We have still a lot of our people in prisons. We still have a lot of people who are homeless. We still have our women getting murdered and missing. And we have all of this stuff that's still going on.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that are still in the war or in the fight.
Yeah.
Making things better. Right. And I've got optimism. I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
I've got optimism. I can see good things at the same time. But you're right. If we focus on what the problems are, just focus on repeating that. We, as Indigenous people, are creating our own solutions. We don't need to wait for government to come and find that solution for us.
Yeah.
We're doing it already.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah.
I truly appreciate it and everything that you shared. And it's left me with so much to sit and think about.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And then let's all work together to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah.